epicenter of both the poll in the Democratic Party and the poll in the general election.
14 states hosting primary elections for Super Tuesday.
Texas is an incredibly diverse state. Other than California, Texas is the game.
We got a great chance to win the Democratic primary here in Texas.
Whoever it is, I don't care. I really don't care. Whoever it is, we will take them on. Hey, the job we've done, we've rebuilt the military, we have the strongest economy we've ever had. All of the things we've done, I will take on anybody.
Super Tuesday is a crucial day in the race for the White House.
The road to victory in November starts right here, right now in Texas.
Dissecting Super Tuesday. Welcome to this live stream KSAT from the KSAT 12 newsroom in conjunction with Trinity University. I'm joined by the chair and professor of the Department of Political Science at Trinity University, Professor David Crockett. Thank you for being with us.
Good to be here.
So this is called Dissecting Super Tuesday. So what did we learn last night?
We learned that the party can move very quickly, coalescing behind a candidate if it really wants to. So it was a pretty remarkable turn of events from over the last 2 weeks to see a pretty decisive night for Joe Biden.
If you were grading last night, what kind of grade would you give the different campaigns? Were you surprised? I asked you this earlier. The biggest surprise for you on Super Tuesday?
That Biden did as well as he did in some places. I think people expected him to do well in some southern states, but places like Massachusetts and Minnesota and Texas, those are always up in the air, and the fact that he did so well, in some cases in states where he did not spend any money or spend any time. So the explanation for that is partisan support.
Yeah, when we say Biden won states, that's a kind of a misnomer because
Yes,
it's really all about delegates at this point, especially when you're talking about Democrats. Explain that a little bit to me.
So in the general election, you win states because most states allocate their electoral votes winner take all. But in the nomination process, you don't really win a state. You do win delegates. So we call someone winning the state if they win a majority. But the fact of the matter is you could actually win a majority of the popular vote. And if someone is 2 points behind you, they may get the same number of delegates you do. So the real metric to use is not so much win or lose, the up or down, but how many delegates did you win relative to the other person? How far ahead did you get in that one state? So if two people get 21 and 20 delegates, the guy with 21 won, not by much in the delegate count.
So as we stand here on this Wednesday after Super Tuesday, Michael Bloomberg suspending his campaign.
Yeah.
Still no word on what Elizabeth Warren is going to do. But in your opinion, on the Democratic side right now, is it just a two-person race?
It looks like that for all practical purposes. I mean, you take all the delegates for all the other candidates so far, and it's a little over 100. Which in the grand scheme of things would only matter if it's a very, very tight race between Biden and Sanders. So Tulsi Gabbard is hanging out there, but she's not really relevant. And the question is, does Elizabeth Warren want to stay to the convention? And she'll end up with probably a couple of hundred delegates. Or does she want to clear the path for probably Bernie Sanders if the sense is it's the establishment or her vision?
So when I talked to Michael Bloomberg on Sunday when he was in town, I said, do you have to win a Super Tuesday state to stay in? And what he told me is it's all about delegates. Mm-hmm. And he basically was putting all of his chips on the fact that he could make it to a brokered convention or a contested convention or however you want to say it. So he didn't do as well as he thought. Is that why you think he basically saw that his narrow window there closed last night?
Yeah, I mean, he won American Samoa and got 4 out of the 6 delegates there.
Yeah.
But, you know, if he had come in second everywhere, he would have amassed a pretty significant number of delegates. He'd be a big story, and we'd be talking about this a week from now and 2 weeks from now, and he could have been really competitive. But he really didn't do that much in most places, so he ends up with 50 or 60 odd delegates, and he's going to make a rational assessment about how to spend hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And if his primary goal is defeat Trump, and he's going to stand in the way of that, if you really believe Sanders is going to be a problem for that, then the smart play is to get out and side behind Biden.
Yeah, which he did today.
Yeah.
When we talk about a contested convention, we're basically talking about nobody getting enough delegates to clinch the nomination.
Right.
And then what happens?
Well, you'll have round one of voting, and so all the delegates vote the way they're pledged to vote, and no one gets the necessary majority to clinch the nomination. You go to round two, And the rules differ in the two parties, but in the Democratic Party, round 2 is where the 700 to 800 superdelegates, who are all sitting office holders and party leaders statewide and nationwide, come into play. That, of course, will raise the total number of delegates at stake, which means the majority you need will be a little bit higher than it was before. But you go to round 2 and see if you can get a majority that way. And you can do this all day long. I mean, there have been, I think the record bad convention was the Democratic Party in 1924, which had 103 ballots before they finally settled. It took them a couple of weeks to figure this out.
Yeah. Do you see a contested convention happening this year?
The more people bow out, the less likely it is. You've got a couple of hundred delegates who would now be free agents. But what we want to see is it is proportional allocation. But it's only kind of proportional, because if no one breaks 15%, then people who do get a larger share than they actually got. So if Joe Biden does this for the next few weeks and continues to increase the lead, if you end up with a 2-person race, it's more likely that one of those two will squeeze over the 1,990 line,
right,
and we won't have one.
Do you see any significance in the numbers when you look at, okay, so Biden was expected to do well in the South.
Yep.
He won Alabama, he won Virginia, he won North Carolina. But states like Massachusetts and Maine weren't expected to kind of be in Joe Biden's wheelhouse, yet he did very well in those states.
Yeah, you expected.
And Minnesota even, you mentioned that.
Yeah, Minnesota should have been a battle between Sanders and Klobuchar, and Massachusetts going to be a battle between Warren and Sanders. And the fact that Biden took those states shows you how quickly the supporters of the establishment Democratic Party came in behind the people that they would have perhaps voted for.
Does this race at this juncture remind you of any races that you've noticed in the past?
It's unusual for a nomination race to get this far with more than 2 people.
Yeah.
But clearly there's a certain analog with what happened with Republicans in 2016 when you had a outsider insurgent candidate against a bunch of people who could legitimately be called part of the establishment and not coalescing behind someone, and Trump won those early races and continued to do so, and by the time it's Trump versus one other person, it was too late.
Right, yeah, it was Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and some of those
John Kasich.
John Kasich who
Yeah,
stayed
they kind
in.
of stayed in for a while.
Yeah, it's interesting that's what it goes back, because, you know, of course, the Biden campaign wants to harken back to the Obama campaign and the Clinton campaign and how South Carolina kind of catapulted those candidates to the front. You see any similarities in those races?
Only in the sense that with Obama and Clinton, you have 2 heavy hitters going all the way into June. But of course, in that race, the superdelegates were part of the equation. And it was very clear that they were going to side behind the person with a larger number of popular votes. They weren't going to rob Obama. Whereas this time, the superdelegates are not part of the initial cut. You still may very well have heavy hitters going all the way to June, much like Clinton faced in 2016 with Sanders as well. Even though she had the edge the whole time, there's no reason for Sanders to get out given what he's really interested in. Yeah. And he could press Biden, and if he wins a significant number of states, this could become close, and the superdelegates are not there to coalesce behind someone.
What is next? What's the next contest that we're looking at? And as you look at the calendar from here, does it favor either Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders?
That's a really interesting question. Of course, this is a serial process, and so things are dynamic and can change based on what happened in the previous contest.
Right.
But the next one is on the 10th, it's a week from yesterday, and you've got 352, 9% of the total at stake, with places like Idaho, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri. I would think Biden would have the inside track on Mississippi and Missouri, but Michigan ought to play to Sanders' strength.
Yeah.
Washington State, you would think, would play to his strength. So I could certainly see a split decision on that day. And then a week later on the 17th, you've got 583 delegates at stake, 15% of the total, with big states like Illinois and Ohio and Florida.
Yeah.
That's a lot of delegates.
Right. I noticed Michael Bloomberg was in Florida last night.
Right.
You know, we're hoping that maybe that would be the next part, but it didn't really happen that way. What happens to, do you think that this process bodes well for the general election that we're in right now? A lot of people talk about Democrats tearing each other apart and how that could not, help them in the general election.
Oftentimes there's a rule of thumb that the more divisive primary hurts that party in the general election. What I'd like to go back to is to think we've had this nomination process for about 40 to 50 years. Every time an incumbent president has won the nomination by acclamation. And for all practical purposes, that's what Trump's going to get. They have never failed to win re-election. So history on that side seems to indicate a Trump advantage.
Right.
He doesn't have to contest anything. He's already going to be lobbing grenades at both of these candidates. I don't think a divisive primary has to hurt you, though, because obviously the Sanders-Clinton race and the Clinton-Obama race, 2016, 2008, those were arguably more divisive than the Republican contest, and in both of those, the Democrat won. But in both of those cases, there was not an incumbent president, and that's what makes this one a little bit different.
Yeah, even George H.W. Bush, when he ran for re-election, and that doesn't really play out in the.
Well, in 1992, he was challenged by Pat Buchanan.
That's right.
And although he
That's
didn't
right.
really have a hard time dispatching him, the fact that Buchanan was out there as this gadfly telling people to pick up their pitchforks and go to war and calling Bush a liberal and betraying the party and a variety of things, that hurt Bush.
Yeah. Where are we with Bloomberg? A lot of people claiming he was trying to buy the election. Where did that backfire for him? Or is it just that the whole Super Tuesday idea was flawed in the first place?
Well,
because like I said, he had a thin
he tried to do what other people
window.
have tried to do, and they have always failed. So Al Gore in 1988 ran, and he decided not to run in the first few states and then swoop in on Super Tuesday, thinking, lots of southern states, I'm from Tennessee, I'll do really well.
Yeah.
And he and Jesse Jackson split the vote, and Michael Dukakis went to the nomination.
Yeah.
And then in, I'm forgetting which year it was, 2008 or 2012, Rudy Giuliani ran for the nomination. He sacrificed the first few contests and decided it's all in Florida, and spent like $60 million for one delegate or 0 delegates. So this idea that you can skip those first few races has never actually worked for people, because those races become the narrative for how things are going. And you can spend apparently $500 million and try to come in on essentially what is almost a quasi-national primary day, Super Tuesday, 1/3 of the delegates.
Right.
But you haven't been part of the story from Iowa through South Carolina. And I think what you see here is the limitations of money. Money is very important in politics, but money is not going to cause people to vote for you if there's nothing there for them to grab onto, the messenger or the message. And he just was not part of that process from last summer in the debates all the way through the February contest.
And when we're talking about this process, the debates are a big part of this process. And 4 years ago, we saw the debates on the Republican side play a big factor in who rose to the top. Jeb Bush did not do well in those debates. Donald Trump, people thought did do well. Ted Cruz, people thought did do well. This time around, we start out and Joe Biden, for lack of a better word, falls flat in some of the first debates. Then we see Bloomberg come in and Bloomberg get eviscerated basically by Elizabeth Warren, and Biden did better. So now we're seeing that kind of play out. I mean, are we in this, maybe because we're in this modern media age, where debates, at least in the primaries, are going to have as big an impact as you've seen?
I would say debates in the primaries have a bigger impact than debates in the general election.
Yeah.
In the general election, you have a party label that motivates a large majority of people. So no matter how badly your candidate does, you're still voting for your team. But in the primary debates, you're trying to figure out who your candidate's going to be. And for a lot of people who haven't been paying attention, they're looking at these people for the first time. Now, that doesn't mean that the best debater wins. I can think of a whole bunch of people over the last 6 months who are better debaters. There's a lot of stuff going on here, including who has the stature, who has the establishment support, or is the establishment not sure? And I think one of the things about what happened with Biden is they weren't sure who they should support, and it became very clear over the last 4 days. But the debates clearly sift through some of that because of how many people drop out during the debates because they can't raise any more money because they were perceived as not doing very well or just didn't ever grab the poll support you need for future debates.
Yeah, and isn't that one of the biggest variables that's still out there as we go forward, is if we have a Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden debate, even if Elizabeth Warren is there or not, it kind of changes the whole dynamic of that debate. And some would tell you Joe Biden has more to lose in debates from here on out than Bernie Sanders does.
Yes, because I think Sanders' support base is pretty rock solid and unmovable. And but now that Biden is seen as the establishment candidate, he may have a strong support base that's unmovable. So in this kind of a choice, I think people have picked their teams. There may be some people who are persuadable, but the bottom line is you want to follow Biden into a normal politics path, or you want to go into the revolution.
Yeah.
And so when it's that stark a choice, then I think the debate performance probably doesn't matter as much as when you have 8 to 10 people on the stage.
Interesting. Does this whole process favor one party as opposed to another party as we head towards November?
If you mean the Democratic Party process here with the debates, then the fact that there is a contested race that's going to go beyond Super Tuesday presumably would favor Republicans, because Trump's just sitting back there waiting to go ahead and unload. And of course, he again will get it by acclamation as the incumbent president. But again, I say that with some caution, because a lot of stuff can happen. There are uncertainties out there, first of which is the coronavirus. We don't know how that's going to play out. So there are a lot of things that can interfere that are outside the control of any of the candidates.
And one of the candidates that keeps talking about the youth movement and getting younger voters out there and things like that is Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
We have not seen evidence of that to this point. Will we?
Yeah, we have been looking for the youth vote for decades, and we know that of the various age cohorts, they show up in the smallest numbers, the smallest percentages. There are very sensible reasons for that. They haven't developed the habit of voting. They have other things on their mind. They don't consume news as much as older folks do. And once you've voted in a couple of elections, you develop that voting habit, and now you're 29 or 30, you own property, you have kids, you're married. There are all sorts of reasons why you begin to care.
Yeah.
So I teach them political science, so most of my students are really engaged. That's because they're political science majors. They're not business majors, or not that they wouldn't be engaged in this, but they haven't developed the habit of voting, and so they're not as connected with that. And we continue to try to talk about how Sanders can mobilize them, but I remain to be convinced.
Yeah, and I know online, Lexi, do we have the graphic online of what the vote breakdown was last night? Okay, it's on KSAT.com. We have a vote breakdown of who voted and who didn't, and traditionally 18 to 29-year-olds are the lowest number of votes, and that certainly played out in Bexar County last night.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren was very clear in the fact that she says Texas is not only in play for Super Tuesday, she believes Texas is in play in November. I talked to Joaquin Castro last night as well. He kind of echoed those sentiments.
Yeah.
But he also said, I kind of think we have to see it to believe it. But do you think Texas will be in play in November?
I want to see it to believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would look for an example of a Democratic candidate winning a statewide race. That could be the presidency.
Right.
That would be the big one.
Yes.
But when I see a Democrat winning a railroad commission job, lieutenant governor, or something like that, then you see that red wall beginning to perhaps change its color or crumble, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's true that O'Rourke took Cruz to 3%, and I think Dan Patrick won by only about 3%.
Right,
so there were several people statewide where it was really close. So I think you're seeing what that might look like. But do I think Trump's going to lose Texas? I think 2020 is still a little bit early.
Yeah.
But I think the 20s, the decade, will probably see something like that. And I think this is where some brothers who have higher ambition might be looking at, when's the right time to jump in.
Right, exactly. So what does the larger result on Super Tuesday say about the influence of the first 4 races in February, when we're talking about Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina? What does Super Tuesday say about that?
So Super Tuesday was invented to take away the influence of the earliest states, because a lot of southern states got fed up that Iowa and New Hampshire had so much disproportionate influence in the process. Ironically, it has magnified the influence of the 2 states, and of course now we have Nevada and South Carolina in the process.
Yeah.
It's a qualified statement I'm making, because obviously what happened in Iowa and New Hampshire seems not to have as much of an impact, but the sequence of races certainly builds up some people and not others. And so Sanders did well. Biden didn't, but then in South Carolina he did, and that sets the stage for Super Tuesday. Buttigieg started off well and didn't do well, and Klobuchar and Warren never did very well, which is why Klobuchar got out and Warren may. So those 4 states still have disproportionate impact, but the type of impact it have, I think, can vary a little bit from cycle to cycle.
I saw on Twitter Dave Wasserman from the Cook Political Report yesterday afternoon said he thinks whoever won Texas last night wins the Democratic nomination. Do you agree with him?
I don't like forecasting, but I think Biden is ahead. I want to see where the rest of these votes go. I think a lot's going to. I think 2 weeks from now, 61% of the delegates will have been chosen, and if Biden continues to surprise, then yes, I think it would be very hard to catch up to him.
Yeah.
But if Sanders can cut into that by winning really solidly in a place like Illinois or Ohio or Michigan, then we really have an interesting story to tell going into June. What Texas looks like is a much more diverse state than one southern state or New Hampshire or Iowa. So I think it's an interesting notion. But I could say that whoever wins Texas will win the nomination, or I could say Texas looked really, really close. Biden surprised us by winning, but it's still very, very close, and that means a very, very close nomination race all the way through June.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hedge.
That's good. I don't have any problem with that. Closing thoughts on Super Tuesday for you?
I think I still am dismayed that a process invented in 1968 is supposedly really, really democratic. And you saw a really large number of people step in, many of whom had very solid resumes. And with now a third of the vote, but even just 2% of the vote, the vast majority of them dropped out. And so it just seems strange to me that a sequential process that's supposed to encourage lots of participation, we may get that if Sanders and Biden go all the way to the end, but in terms of weighing in on whether Kamala Harris or Booker or any of these other people might have been worthy candidates, I mean, these are people of some substance, they're just not part of the equation.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a peculiar process that probably no one would design this way if we had to design it from scratch. We've inherited it, but it's kind of weird.
Do you think Iowa's in trouble with their first caucus
I think
of the process?
If everything kind of works smoothly, they might just kind of hunker down and come back in 2024 and do it again, but there'll be a lot of scrutiny of that one because of how it worked. And I'm curious if they would simply toss it and go to a primary, but then that raises a whole other can of worms. Because New Hampshire state law requires it to be the first primary.
Right.
And they have no problem with Iowa's place because they're a caucus. If I were to say, let's forget this caucus stuff and go to a primary, and we want to go first, you'd see this battle taking us back to a primary day on January 1st because no one's willing to budge.
Yeah.
So I wonder if at some point will the party just kind of wield its heavy hand and say, we're not doing this anymore, we're not counting you, we'll do regional rotating primaries, and this has been a kind of pie in the sky recommendation for a couple of decades to have rotating regional primaries where not one state determines so much.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get that.
Be interesting. David Crockett from Trinity University, professor and chair of the political science department. Thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
And as always, we want to thank everybody who watched us on KSAT.com as well as on the Trinity Tiger Network. Thank you all for joining us. Until next time, Steve Spriester. Have a great day.